On February 20th of 2008, the fire department was called to a house that was burning in a small town in Maine. After they put out the flames and went inside, they discovered a gruesome scene, and it obviously wasn't caused by the fire. This is the Insidious case of Matthew Cushing. Hello, friend, and welcome to High Time Crime. My name's Joel, and on here I specialize in true crime and also secretly being obsessed with soap operas. How could she go back to Derek when everyone knows that she's in love with Carl? No! But anyways, today we're going over the case of Matthew Cushing and what he did to his family. You're going to learn about someone who, to the outside world, appeared normal, but in reality was much more tormented than anyone could realize. For our story, we're heading to a small little town in Maine known as Old Orchard Beach. Now in 2008, the population was exactly 9,399 people. The area is known as one of Maine's premier beach resort towns, and there's a ton of things to do. You could go to Palace Playland and go on a number of rides, definitely having a lot of fun. Old Orchard Beach has 7 miles of beaches, and so during the summertime, you could sit out by the waves and just relax. If you're interested, you could go on a boat tour or rent a kayak, depends on your preference. Unfortunately, none of those options are why we're here today, but it appears as if everyone knows everyone in this little town. Sometimes it's a good question to ask yourself if you really know those people. Carol Lee Bolduc was born on October 29th of 1965 to Harvey and Sandra Griffin. She had 8 siblings, and I can imagine that household was certainly an interesting one. Not much is really known about her childhood, but we do know a few things. Carol attended Bristol Consolidated School from preschool to 8th grade, and then went to Lincoln Academy and graduated with the class of 1983. Now, I'm not sure exactly when or how, but she did meet a guy named Paul Cushing, and they got along pretty well at first. The two of them got married and went on to have a boy named Matthew Paul Cushing in 1987. We'll go more into depth into Matthew in a little bit. Carol and Paul's relationship wasn't exactly the best, and so they got divorced when Matthew was a baby. It wasn't long before Carol would meet another guy. His name was Christopher Bolduc. Now in 1993, they'd have their only child together named Joshua, and we'll talk about the both of them here shortly. But in 2008, Carol was attending Andover College, studying to be a medical transcriptionist. While she was doing this, she was also working with Chris at one of his 2 businesses in town. She was the president of the Ocean Fairway Association, so she definitely cared about the area. Carol was very active in the community. She was very loved and well respected. She spent a lot of time reading, laying out in the sun, and she adored her children. Christopher Scott Bolduc was born in Portland, Maine, to Richard Bolduc and Sandra Miller. Growing up, he attended schools in Windham and graduated from Lincoln Academy with the class of 1984, a year after Carol, so it's definitely possible that they knew of each other in high school. Regardless, afterwards, Chris attended the University of Southern Maine, and it was here that something happened that we'll talk about a little later. Eventually, Chris and Carol would become a thing, and then get married in 1991. They settled down in a small little town known as Old Orchard Beach, and they became pretty well known. Chris opened up 2 businesses or novelty shops, one named Blustery Day Flags, and the other the Race Place. At the same time, he was also a partner at BM Foods, which was a food diverting business in New Hampshire. He was a hardworking, well-respected leader in his community. Chris was very involved in restructuring Old Orchard Beach to make it more attractive to tourists and business-oriented people. He used to be the president of Ocean Fairways Association, but Carol took that over. Chris was considered to be a very thoughtful, loving, caring husband, father, and friend. Now, he only had one child, and that was a boy named Joshua. Joshua Richard Bolduc was born on May 15th of 1993. He was 15 years old in 2008 and was infatuated with the family dog, Spike. That was one of his best friends. Joshua was a freshman at Old Orchard Beach and was very close with his family. He loved spending time at the lake with his cousins. He loved snowboarding, skateboarding, playing video games and music, making videos, and he even had aspirations of becoming a producer. In school, Joshua ran with the punk rockers and skateboarders. His favorite bands were the Misfits, Rancid, and the Ramones. He was an energetic person that was always nice to everyone, and he really enjoyed playing World of Warcraft. Joshua considered his older half-brother his hero. He talked about him constantly in such a light, but unfortunately, his older brother was not a hero. In fact, he was the exact opposite. Matthew Paul Cushing was born on February 2nd of 1987 to Carol Bolduc and Paul Cushing. While information about his early life is scarce, we do know some things. Matthew grew up about as normal a child as it really gets. He attended Cub Scouts, he was well-liked, and a bright kid. But the thing about Matthew is that while growing up, he didn't know that Chris wasn't his father. Carol and Chris hadn't told Matthew about who his real father was, and Matthew found out at the age of 7. How he found out isn't really known, but this definitely had a devastating effect on him that nobody even realized. While in high school, specifically 12th grade, he took a trip to Ghana, Africa, and really enjoyed it. He had some sort of fixation with going back to Africa, and one of his heroes was Nelson Mandela. Matthew graduated from Old Orchard Beach High School and then attended the University of Maine at Orono studying European history and anthropology. Here, he got along well with a lot of people and was looked at as the clown of the group, lighthearted, and a person that could send a room full of friends into a fit of laughter. Matthew didn't exhibit any signs of depression, and he always told people close to him that his relationship with his family was great. While originally, close friends of Matthew came out and said that he wasn't doing drugs, that was quite the opposite. He lived with 10 roommates in a house off campus, and a little bit after starting college, he began drinking heavily and started doing drugs. He really dabbled with cocaine. If Matthew didn't have enough money for alcohol, he'd buy 2 to 3 bottles of cough syrup and chug them. It's safe to say he definitely had a problem with alcohol. Before his 12th grade year, he decided to take the semester off to go on a backpacking trip to Europe to meet a friend when he was 22. Matthew was very dependent on his parents to help him with funds for pretty much everything. He asked them if they could help with his trip, and they gave him money, but he didn't go on the trip. Instead, Matthew bought a bunch of drugs and alcohol, and things started to take a dark turn. 2 months before his reign of terror, he had a dog, a husky named Nanook. One day after Christmas, on December 26th of 2007, Nanook ran outside and was hit by a car. Matthew loved Nanook, and he took this very hard. This clearly made everything worse. Within a few weeks, Matthew then got a tattoo of his brother's name, Joshua, on his stomach, which is eerie when we try to think about the reasoning. Matthew was worried that his mom and stepfather were going to get divorced, and so he bought a taser and started to do some internet searching, but this searching wasn't anything normal. Matthew was searching for the best places to stab people, figuring out that stabbing someone in their eyes disables them. He was looking for a silencer for a gun, life insurance policies, and so on. Matthew had murder on his mind, and he wasn't going to stop until that day finally came, and it did. On Wednesday, February 20th of 2008, it was a sunny day, but pretty cold in the small town of Old Orchard Beach, Maine. I'm not exactly sure why Matthew chose this day, but he woke up, got ready, packed a bag with a knife and a taser, got into his blue 1995 Ford Taurus, and drove into town. Originally, his plan was to just kill his stepfather, Chris, so Matthew drove to his business. When he got there, he realized that there was too many people around, and so he decided to go to his old childhood home. Matthew was going to sit there and wait for Chris, but was surprised to see that his little brother Joshua was home. Matthew started telling Joshua all about the divorce and how it's going to ruin their family. Joshua didn't really care that much and tried saying that everything would be okay and they'd work it out. Matthew was getting more and more angry and then told Joshua about how he planned to kill Chris. Matthew then started asking Joshua to help him, but obviously Joshua didn't want to kill his dad, and so this made Matthew absolutely furious. He, in a rage, attacked Joshua and proceeded to take his life with the knife he brought. The internet searches that we talked about earlier is how he took Joshua's life. But Matthew said that after he killed his brother, he didn't get any thrill out of it, and he wasn't very upset about it either. After this, he knew that his life was over, but this was just the beginning of his heinous acts. While this was all going on, Matthew's mother, Carol, was in town working when she got a call from a friend telling her that Matthew was in town. She was surprised by this, and so she packed up her belongings, left the family business, and headed home at 2:15 p.m. At 2:35 p.m., Carol called her husband, Chris, who was still at the family store, and told him that she saw Matthew's car parked at the dog park. Shortly after this, Carol arrived home, and to her surprise, Matthew was there waiting. He had blood on his shirt, and he looked a little crazy, and so Carol asked him what was going on, why he was home, and if he was okay. Matthew was acting very weird, and so Carol asked him where Joshua was, and Matthew told her not to worry about it, that everything was fine. Carol offered Matthew some money, but he declined, and so she started to say that she was going to call the police. Carol then tried to get past Matthew to go to Joshua's room when Matthew attacked her and tackled her to the ground. He took her life in the same manner that he took Joshua's. Afterwards, he dragged her body to Joshua's bedroom and waited for the last member of their family, Chris. While waiting, Matthew was prancing around, going insane, blaming Chris for him having to kill his family and all of their problems. He was also very happy, excited rather, just waiting for Chris to walk through that door. Meanwhile, Chris, at 3:30 p.m., was trying to call Carol and Joshua, but he was getting no response. He was getting very worried and decided he needed to go home to check on them just in case something was wrong. A good family friend named William worked at Chris's store, Blustery Day Flags, and he knew what was going on. He told Chris that if he doesn't hear from him in an hour or so, he's going to call the police. Shortly after this, Chris arrived to the family home and he was sneakily attacked. Matthew used the stun gun he purchased to take down Chris and afterwards proceeded to take his life. He wasn't finished just yet, however. I mentioned earlier that Joshua had a dog and he really loved him. His name was Spike. Well, Matthew decided to walk down the hallway to the dog's cage and also stab Spike to death. Then he went to a few different places in the house and started multiple fires in an attempt to burn the house down. A neighbor called William, the good friend that worked with Carol and Chris, at 5:40 p.m. and told him that an alarm was going off at the Bolduc residence. At 5:42 p.m., William called the police and, well, when they got there, they put the fire out and figured out that they had a much more gruesome scene than they realized. This wasn't just a fire, but an awful set of murders, and the police knew exactly who to look for. By 10 p.m., the investigators were attempting to locate Matthew, and they located him at 10:40 p.m. He was dressed in pajama pants and socks, and he had cuts all over his hand. He said that he got them while cutting a thick piece of steak, and that he wasn't in Old Orchard Beach that night. Matthew also told them that he was depressed and decided to drive to visit his biological father, Paul, but then pulled over and cried and drove back home. Obviously, this was all a lie, and Matthew was terrible at being deceptive. The police searched his home and found a bloody backpack containing a switchblade and a stun gun. Matthew was immediately arrested, and this time he admitted to killing his family. The reasons that he gave were a bit interesting, as to he's never came out and gave a real definitive answer. Matthew personally said that he was angry at his parents for not funding a backpacking trip to Europe, but they did apparently give him money and he spent it on drugs and alcohol. Matthew also said that because Chris was supposedly going to leave his mother Carol, he was super upset about this and felt like his mom couldn't support them without him. Allegedly, Chris had been in a relationship with another man in college, and this relationship had a fuse sparking again. Matthew had wrote in papers at his house about how he didn't like that sort of lifestyle and how he had difficulties with homosexuality. He also said that his stepfather mistreated him, his brother, and his mother. All accounts, however, dispute this and show that Chris was a great father to both Matthew and Joshua, and he was a great husband to Carol. Chris even acted like Matthew was his. That's how close they were. A few years would pass, and on March 26th of 2009, Matthew was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. It's very clear that he had severe problems, but he had mental examinations done and was found to be of a sound mind. Matthew was just evil. As to what the real reason he murdered his family was, I don't know if we'll ever know. When asked about why he killed the dog also, he responded by saying that he just killed his family and that he doesn't give a damn about a dog. He was cruel, very cruel. I genuinely hope that Christopher, Carol, and Joshua are all resting peacefully and that the rest of their families are one day able to find some closure. Matthew is in jail and never going to get out, so at least there's a bit of justice on this side. But anyways, thank you for watching this episode of High Time Crime. If true crime is your thing, then please subscribe and hit the like button because that's all we do. I also have a second account with my brother named Horrifying where we tell stories about everything paranormal. This includes true crime, mysteries, and things that are just downright spooky. I'd greatly appreciate if you subscribe to that too. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Take care, friend.